And now, for the new year, I will read a story taking place on New Year's Eve. The Fall. The city lay below him, dots of light in the darkness. It was impossible to tell where the skyscrapers ended and the night sky began, even from up here. His gaze trailed upwards anyway, away from the confusing maze of streets stretched out below him like an endless sea of concrete and glass. He was unable to really see it because of all the light that shone from the city, but he knew that the dark, near midnight sky was overcast with heavy clouds, promising a storm. Soon, of course, another type of storm would start, as smoke would fill the streets and colorful explosions would banish what little darkness remained. He took another swig from the bottle he held in his hand. He was not entirely sure how it had gotten there, when or where he had taken it, but he did not particularly care. The alcohol was strong, and it did what it was supposed to do. It warmed his body and numbed his mind. No, it did not numb him. It made the thoughts sharper, clearer, their jagged edges digging into his flesh. The alcohol served to banish all those useless thoughts that always held him up, that swallowed him and made it impossible to actually think for a minute. Everything came into focus. He felt frighteningly sober and level-headed. It was important that he felt this way, given the fact that he was about to take his own life. A decision like that should not be made lightly or under duress. Least of all, it should be made at times of crises. No, the decision to kill oneself needed to be taken level-headed with all the necessary consideration. If the alcohol helped him reach that sunlight-like state of mind he needed, then so be it. But maybe something would happen that would deter him from throwing himself off of this skyscraper. Maybe something would happen. Someone would appear here to guide him down, away from the darkness and into the light. But he highly doubted it. After all, it was the 31st of December, close to midnight. It was the last day of the old year, and what a year it had been. He was not pretending, even to himself, that the past year had been the worst year of his life. That would have been too emotional a reaction, would have made it seem like there was a crisis, like he was merely lashing out like a toddler, throwing its body down and hammering the floor with his fists. Only he would land with a splash on the concrete of the business district, which was empty and bereft of any life but his, if one could even call it a life. It was more like an existence, and a pretty miserable one at that. He took another swig of the bottle. It was almost empty. A quick, almost automatic glance at his watch. He still had about 20 minutes until the bells would toll to ring in the new year. He had calculated that would take him about 30 to 40 seconds to make the trip from up here to down there. So he was confident that he would hit the pavement before the last tolling of the bell. He had briefly considered to jump at 23:59, but there was a perverse glee in taking the countdown to the new year as the countdown to his own annihilation. But there was still time for the old year to apologize for its mistakes. Not that it would, of course. And he knew it. And it was not like this year alone was the reason he was standing here on the night of December 31st, ready to jump and end the whole sorry business. It had been a long time coming. It had been a long time in the making. And he was not being dramatic in wanting to jump to his death on New Year's. On the contrary, he was being level-headed and responsible, looking out for others. Come the morrow, the remains of his body would simply be swept into the gutter with the other trash of a night of reveling, and the remnants of once bright fireworks. There was no danger of him accidentally jumping on somebody's head, because the business district was empty. No one came here to celebrate the new year, and he could hardly blame them. He felt slightly sorry for the person whose key he had stolen to actually access the building, but on the other hand, who took their work key with them to a drunken debauchery. Come to think of it, why had he even been there? He had not wanted to go. He had wanted to just stay home and get drunk in peace. There had been plans. Plans of red wine and soft music, razor blades and warm bath water. Instead, he had allowed himself to get dragged to some absurd party happening in some rundown bar in the inner city. He had gone along with it because the call had come the moment before he had uncorked the wine bottle. The music had already been playing, and he had begun lighting the bathroom candles, but the preparations had been far from done. It had seemed like a sign, like fate wanted to give him another chance. At the party, of course, he had just stood in a corner, feeling out of place and invisible, boxed in and absolutely miserable. He had, on a whim, grabbed the key and 3 bottles of gin and fled. Fled to the business district, although at first he had just walked through the ice-cold air under the leaden sky, threatening to bring a storm, but not yet unleashing the foul fury of winter. He remembered now how he had stood on the bridge, looking at the river, thinking of Heraclitus. You can't jump twice in the same river. Well, of course you can't, because you'll hopefully be dead after the first time. But jumping off of a bridge seemed so melodramatic. Like a 20-year-old self-styled poet suffering the Werther effect and deciding to end his life right then, right there. No rationale, no thinking, just pure emotion. Which was not what his suicide was about. He was not simply a bit sad and thus deciding to take his life. He was also not in the throes of any sort of mental illness, so he had never seen the need to contact any sort of suicide hotline. He had simply realized that his life, his existence, had nothing much left to offer, and that the best thing to do would be to simply end it. Cut your losses, as the saying goes. Quit while you're ahead. Only he had never really been ahead, but that was a moot point now, up here. He took another swig from the bottle, then threw it over the railing, listening intently for the small sound of shattering glass, counting the seconds. He was not disappointed. His estimation had not been off. It had paid off, after all, to wander through this nightmarish maze of concrete and glass, of high structures and grey streets, contemplating the best way to kill himself. Because nothing was less romantic than the business district. And since it was the 31st of December, there was no sort of line to the roof, no throng of laid-off secretaries or disgraced middle managers who decided, spur of the moment, to just take a short trip with the elevator and then a long trip by free fall. It was just him, in his long beige winter coat, standing under a leaden, overcast sky that felt close enough to touch, and he was ready to just take a long walk off a short roof. It was also tiring, always had been. His peers and his marriage, his pursuits and hobbies, it was all just distraction. It all amounted to nothing in the end. He had tried to find it all. Love, fame, knowledge, wealth. Yet, ultimately had gained nothing. He was all alone, but standing on this roof, he was for the first time able to embrace it. He had, it was true, for a while cultivated this image of being the outsider, the outcast, but then had changed radically, tried to fit in more, to become the missing piece of the puzzle. Both ways had not brought him any closer to his goals, nor even the slightest hint of happiness. This here, standing on this roof in the business district, was the culmination of years of fruitless searching. It was the end point of all his perseverance. He had been planning to do this since his 12th birthday. It was high time he went through with it. It was the perfect time to go through with it now that everything had been stripped away. Every slight and insult, every injury and failure, every hurt and loss, it had all been stripped away, fallen by the wayside, leaving behind nothing but the empty core wrapped in what he kept telling himself was barbed wire cynicism. He hoped that no one would try to use his suicide as any sort of moral or political statement, because that was not what it was. It was just a culmination of his life, his existence. Every life's journey leads, inevitable, to the death as its ultimate conclusion. His had led him rather straightforward onto this roof. He checked his watch again. About 10 minutes remained. He idly wondered if there was anything he really had left to wonder about. Any regrets he wanted to address, memories he wanted to relive. But he found that there was nothing, just an almost eerie calm, mirroring the silent night air around him, almost as if the world was holding its breath in anticipation of the old year dying and the new year beginning, a transitional period that lasted barely long enough to be noticed, in anticipation also of his own death and hopefully no new beginning, just finally being at peace. He, of course, did not hold his breath. He kept on breathing regularly, calmly, evenly. There was no need to panic, no need to rush things. He had no regrets and he had no stray thoughts. He looked up at the sky again, wondering, idly of course, whether the snow would see out the old year or wait for the new to begin. It did not matter to him either way. He was not afraid of frostbite or hypothermia. It might make for a few beautiful last seconds, of course, seeing the fireworks through the falling snowflakes. But knowing this city, what would come down would be cold and unpleasant mush, too dense to be rain, but not nearly ethereal enough to be snow. And the thought of landing in that mush terrified him, as much as anything could terrify him in his state anyway. He sauntered over to the railing. Should he be whimsical and just sit on the edge, his legs dangling above the sheer drop, like a kid on a lazy afternoon or a contractor on a lunch break? There was a sensation then, barely noticeable, as if the entire world took a half step to the left. Everything seemed to slow down. What little color remained faded, became washed out, like seen through a wet windshield. His first thought was that apparently the alcohol had been stronger than he had anticipated. What did this mean for his suicide? Nothing, of course. The decision had been made hours before he even began to think about drinking. The only thing he was able to see with any degree of clarity was what appeared to be a silhouette, sitting on the railing, legs dangling, but it did not look whimsical, almost menacing. He did not know why, but he shivered and pulled his coat closer to his body as he slowly approached the edge of the roof. When he had almost gotten close enough to touch, the figure, for it was a figure, in one swift movement turned around and jumped down to where he stood, a grin splitting its face open like a gaping wound, the teeth crawling maggots. But the impression lasted for less than a moment before all he saw was a slightly overweight, middle-aged man with a jovial grin and laugh lines around his eyes. He was dressed in a cream-colored suit, complete with vest and moss green tie. He extended a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "Hello, I'm Anton. I've been waiting for you." For me? Why would anyone wait for him? People never waited for him. He was the guy you invited to the road trip and forget to pick up or left behind at the gas station. And even more concerning, why would anyone wait for him here? Until an hour ago, he himself had not known he'd end up on this roof. "Yes, for you. I have been watching you for quite a while," Anton continued, seemingly undisturbed by the cold or their location. He was talking freely, his voice calm and gentle. There was a slight irony twinkling in his eyes, which found itself reflected in his voice. But every time I thought you were ready for me, I found that I could not approach you. So I said to myself, Anton, Anton, why don't you wait till the dude comes to you? And a sweeping gesture indicating the roof and their two bodies standing opposite each other. Here we are. It was a very theatrical kind of movement and one that he disliked. It was not fun to see it, it actually grated on his nerves, and he found Anton to be rather unpleasant. But at the same time, he could not help but be intrigued by this strange figure. He felt no fear, which was surprising, until he remembered that he had literally come up here to die, so if some weirdo in an ugly suit would shoot or stab him, the end result would not really change. Why would you want to approach me? Wait, no, scratch that. Who are you? Anton laughed at that, a sound that bubbled forth from the deepest pits of his considerable belly. But there seemed to be an edge to his laughter as well, a hint of fire and ice deadly to the touch. So many questions. Always asking, always searching. That is what I like about you. Well, it's not all I like about you, but it's definitely up there. But you see, at this point in time, does it really matter who I am? The question was delivered with a smile that was supposed to be genuine and open, but looked more like the lower part of a chicken with its head missing. He did not need to ruminate long to find an answer. Actually, it does, and right now you're mostly in my way. With that, he made to pass the figure of Anton so he did not miss his cue. It would be terribly frustrating to miss it by just a few seconds. He did not want to make too big of a deal out of it, but at the same time, there was such a thing as the power of a ritual. Anton grabbed his arm. Are you sure you want to do that? A bright young man like you, who has spent his days and nights chasing after wealth and love, fame and knowledge, who has been continuously met with failure and loss, with others using him only as footstool and punching bag. Do you really think that this will bring you happiness? Anton also knew how to ask a lot of questions, it seemed. But he did not really want to think about questions right now. His mind was clear of any doubt, any question, except whether or not it would start to snow. The other man probably had a point, but what did it matter? Anton had said it himself. He had wanted to approach him, but never did so. Well, now the time for approaching had gone by, similar to how the side of the building would rush by him as the ground came up to meet him. He did not say anything, but the others seemed to read his mind, or at least his face. Don't do anything you are going to regret later. Hear me out, please. A slightly pleading note now crept into Anton's voice, which did not make it more endearing, but still, he stopped. There still was a bit of time. Anton continued. I knew you'd see reason. Here's the deal. I can give you everything you ever dreamed of, and more. Your ideas of what love, wealth, and fame are nothing compared to what I can give you. But first I will sate your thirst for knowledge, because that is the foundation upon which everything else rests, and I think you know that. Your searching mind knows that. It might be the only thing it knows, but you tried to learn to know it all, but you never managed to find the answers that really mattered. Isn't that right? Isn't that what you realized on your 12th birthday? That the adults did, in fact, not have it figured out. So how in the fuck should you? Anton's voice had become soft, almost hypnotic. At the same time, there was something else in there. Like a razor blade hidden inside cotton candy. Like a hand grenade inside a poodle. Like a snake in the grass. He wondered why Anton was able to talk this long. Time seemed to have not stopped entirely, for he could see some snowflakes making their way down from the clouds in slow motion. Time seemed to have frozen, at least in the area around Anton, which he was in as well. He glanced at his watch, saw the hands slowly crawling towards midnight. He had to move. Anton continued to talk, a slight hint of desperation now creeping in as well. I can show you how it all comes together. I can show you the hidden levers and secret strings, the cracks and the rifts. I can teach you so much. I can make you king for a day and make that day last almost forever. What do you say?" Anton extended his hand again, and he could see that there was a trickle of blood coming out of Anton's palm. At the same time, he realized that he had cut his palm as well, probably earlier, when he had dropped the bottle and picked up the pieces. "Come on, man," came Anton's voice again, this time almost whining. It was singularly unpleasant, and he was so angry at this strange little creature ruining his last year on Earth that he almost wished to call it off. "You have been pushed around, but with me you will finally be able to push back. Don't you want that? Don't you want to push around others? Feel all that power?" He looked at Anton and came to a decision. With a decisive movement, he stepped towards Anton and pushed him aside, hard and strong. Anton, who clearly had not expected his offer to be taken this literally, lost his footing and fell down, but he paid no heed to the fall, and as he vaulted the railing, feeling how time sped up again, how it became midnight the moment his body left the roof and entered free fall. His face was skywards, and he could see the colorful explosions of the fireworks painting their crazy patterns on the canvas of the clouds which dispensed their snow. Snowflakes whirled and danced around his head, accompanying him downwards, readying themselves to cover his body with an ephemeral blanket. He was dimly aware of his coattails flapping, his gloves being ripped off by the rushing wind, but he did not care. There were tears in his eyes, blurring the scene, turning the fireworks into an impressionist painting. But it was not just the wind that brought them out. They were tears of joy and of relief. For the first time since his 12th birthday, he felt at ease and at peace. He was one with himself and one with the world. As the bell tolled for the final time, his body hit the pavement with a wet, crunching sound, blood and viscera pooling around the crumpled remains of his flesh. And the virgin snow of the new year softly fell, burying his sins. I wish every viewer of this channel a great and wonderful new year.